Oh, good day. Hey, my deacons told me that might be some people that might be interested in my life. So I'm here to thank you for being interested. I am the Reverend Gowan Pamphlet, senior pastor of the First Baptist Church here in Williamsburg. Matter of fact, we're the only Baptist church here in Williamsburg. So we're really honored to have you with us today. And many times in my life that I find myself in this situation where I'm able to talk with people, I like to tell them about some of the things that happened in my life for some time. As a matter of fact, this location that I'm here is brand new. We just moved into this building. This is my first building we've ever had as a congregation. My Baptist congregation now of over 500 members. We're now located on the corner of Nassau and Francis Street. This building was actually given to us by the owner of this property. His name was Mr. Jesse Cole. As a matter of fact, Mr. Cole, interestingly enough, became a member of my church. We had two locations previous to here on Nassau Street. My first location when we started our church in 1776 out in a place called Green Springs, right outside the city limits, just maybe a handful of people. And I had gone out to Green Springs to start the First Baptist Church. But soon we grew pretty fast at that location. Green Springs, as a matter of fact, is one of the few plantations that would allow Baptists, because I'm not sure if you know this or not, but back before 1776, you could not have a legal Baptist church or be recognized as a legal denomination in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Delaware, eventually Maryland, New York. Very few places will allow Baptists as a legal denomination. As a matter of fact, Baptist started in a place called Rhode Island. As a matter of fact, it was a man by the name of Roger Williams, one of our great heroes, that founded one of the first Baptist congregations in the place called Providence. As a matter of fact, Roger Williams was one of the founders of the city of Providence, Rhode Island, in about 1639. And that's where the Baptist movement started. And of course, as you know, Baptists, they spread pretty quickly, not only in Rhode Island, but of course down in Connecticut and up parts of the New York, not down where you had Manhattan and other boroughs, they call them, but starting in the upper state part of New York. And of course, Pennsylvania. Thank God for Pennsylvania being one of those colonies like Rhode Island that had religious freedom and allowed all denominations to be freely operated in those colonies. But we were just so happy to see some of the First Baptists coming down into Virginia, and about a group of them would head down to Virginia about 1750. As a matter of fact, one of my great heroes of the Baptist movement, his name was Reverend Jeremiah Walker. Never ever forget him. As a matter of fact, I hadn't seen a lot of Baptists or hadn't even heard a lot of Baptists preach until the day that Jeremiah Walker walked right here into Williamsburg down the Duke of Gloucester Street, had his Bible, like my King James Bible here. Got this in my Christmas box not too long ago. I got this King James Bible, 1611. First time it's printed and sent it over. But Jeremiah Walker had his Bible in his hand, walking down the middle of the Duke of Gloucester Street, saying to the top of his voice, "There's neither Jew nor Gentile, bond nor free, male nor female. We all one in Christ." I'll never forget that day. That's the first time I ever heard a Baptist preach before. And boy, did he just gather a crowd in the middle of the Duke of Gloucester Street, took them down there near to the Bruton Parish Church. And of course, I knew that was trouble. I hurried down the street and got in the middle of that crowd, and I told the folks, I said, you know, this Baptist is not illegal. He's not a legal preacher. He's not going to last 1 hour. And he didn't last 1 hour. It was that evening he was arrested for preaching without the proper license, disturbing the king's peace, and took him down to the jailhouse, and that's where I met him that night. And that was the Reverend Walker that looked in my eyes that I had never had anyone do before and tell me and ask me the question, do you want to be free, Gowan? You see, I was born a slave, and I spent most of my time in the King's Army Tavern and enslaving this society, and as a worker in that tavern, I never had thought about ever being free. Well, he was the first person that even asked me, did I ever want to be free? And as he went on with his sermons, and he told me many, many things about the Baptists, well, it was not too long after that that I became an ordained Baptist preacher, 1772, and it was 1776, with those handful of people went out to Green Springs and started out that my congregation. And we grew pretty fast, 1776, as you well know, the year of the Great War of Independence. You might find this quite surprising or even have a query about it. Why is it, Gowan, that the revolution, why would that benefit you as a slave? Well, as an ordained Baptist preacher, yet still a slave, what that war did for us as a congregation, I really did believe right from the very beginning, because of those jewels, I call them diamonds, in the rough. They were called ideas of liberty, freedom, equality, and justice. If somehow we could win this war against Great Britain, just maybe, my congregation will find a day where they will be able to be free. You see, my 500-member congregation are made up mainly of enslaved people. And yes, from the very time we were at Green Springs in 1776 until we had to move from Green Springs to a place called Raccoon's Chase. That's right there by the College of William and Mary, right behind the College of William and Mary, a place called College Creek. And right at the mouth of the creek, right off that road to Jamestown, we started our congregation from Green Springs to Raccoon Chase in 1781, and was there, grew pretty quick from 1781 after we won the great battle, the great victory. Huzzah! Huzzah! We won that battle against Great Britain, and I just knew right then we had a chance maybe to have not just a congregation of Baptists, but to be a legal Baptist denomination here in the new country called the United States of America. I believe my congregation itself will become free themselves as a congregation, although most of them are enslaved. As a denomination, we will be a free denomination able to worship as we please. Thank God that war brought us what we needed. 1786, with these statutes of religious freedom, we got exactly what we needed. With that, those statutes of Mr. Thomas Jefferson, who's now Secretary of State, we have now the time now where we're able to worship as we please, don't have to worry about anymore hiding out and having to find a place to worship. We now have our own building, our first building here. So about 1800 this year, Jesse Cole gave us a plot of land right here on the corner of Nassau and Francis. He, as a matter of fact, was somewhere near our congregation there at Raccoon's Chase off the road to Jamestown near College Creek. He got kind of caught up in hearing my congregation, which then is over 400 people. And he somehow got around and listened to my preaching, then he stormed into the congregation and passed out. We didn't know who he was, but at the very time we rushed over to his side, and as we brought him to, he would raise up and look me straight in the eye. Reverend Pamphlet, I am Mr. Jesse Cole of the Coles. We own this property there on Nassau and Francis all the way back to the college. I'm not only going to join your congregation, but I'm going to give you 3 city lots. And it was there, and we moved into this building here on this property just this year, and great celebration, and looking forward to serving not only the community, but anyone that wants to know the Word of God and wants to be a Baptist. We're here to serve them. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm a Baptist preacher. I can go on for the next at least 3 hours. Love to preach. Sermons last about at least three hours themselves, but I'm sure you might have some other questions or queries for me, so I'm going to give you time to ask some questions for your own curiosity.
Thank you, sir. We've noticed that you have a new title, Senior Pastor Reverend Pamphlet. We were wondering what is the change and what does it mean, sir?
Well, thank you, sister. I am honored now not just to be the Reverend Gowan Pamphlet. As a matter of fact, when I was ordained in 1772 over in a place called Surrey, across the James River, I was ordained by 30 white Baptist preachers. And at that time, I was ordained officially. Even my owner, who owned the King's Arms Tavern, her name is Mrs Jane Vova, God rest her soul, she passed away in 1786 up in the new capital of Richmond. The capital moved from Williamsburg to Richmond about 1780. And about 1784, she would sell the King's Arms Tavern and move up to Richmond Town, a place called Osborne's, right up on the James River. New tavern that she purchased, but she only lasted about 2 years and died 1786. But upon her deathbed, she told her son, David Miller, that I was to be free. And it was not too long after that. In fact, Mr. Miller himself allowed me the time and the date that I was to be free, which was 1793. I got my free paper. And of course, I said my congregation was just growing, like weeds. We went from just a handful of people in 1776. By the time I got my freedom paper in 17, I had over 500 members. And now, of course, that's a lot of people to take care of, and I needed to some help in the congregation there to kind of manage some of my responsibilities as a minister. So I ordained 3 other Baptist preachers, and they are now with me in the pulpit. I have the Reverend Israel Kemp, who had a church out in Yorktown. He built himself and has started his own congregation, but now he's in the pulpit with me. The Reverend John Dipper. Reverend John Dipper is a great man of God and a great worker of God. And the Reverend Joseph Meade. I ordained all 3 of them. We are part of what you call the Dover Baptist Minister Association. So that made me get another title because of having 3 ministers now in my congregation I have under me. Now I'm the senior pastor, Gowan Pamphlet. I know that's a Baptist answer, by the way.
Thank you, sir. Allison asked, how many people typically come to your church service?
Well, that's a great question. It depends on the day or whenever we're having revival meetings or any prayer worship service. Our service on Sunday lasts all day from sun up to sundown. So when people leave the church on Sunday, they start arriving in the church, I would say about 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and they're there until the sun goes down. So imagine not everybody can come to church at the same time all the time, so maybe about 300 or more people might be at the church at a given Sunday. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. We have had a few questions in regard to your previous owner, Mrs. Vova. We were wondering if maybe you could speak on that relationship a little bit more.
Well, let me tell you something. I have thought about this relationship with Mrs. Vova a long time. I've always been, as a slave, owned by her. She owned my mama and my papa. My mother was a cook in the kitchen. Her name was Grace. I did know her for a short time before she passed away. And my father, Little John, I knew him, a carter. Carted goods back and forth for Mrs. Vova for the King's Arms Tavern. But Mrs. Vova had always seen that I was a little bit special. As a matter of fact, she taught me reading, my letters. She taught me the alphabet. She taught me numbers, even a little addition and subtraction. And she taught me how to keep some of the books there. She always thought I was able to pick up things pretty quickly. And she took it on herself. Of course, we had, by the grace of God, a teacher that taught a Negro school here in 1760. Her name is Mrs. Ann Wager. And I remember, in fact, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, about 1756, and when he came to Williamsburg, he was honored by the College of William and Mary. And not too long after that honorary doctorate that he had gotten from William and Mary, he came down to the King's Arms Tavern and met with Mr. Robert Carter Nicholas, Mr. William Hunter, and they talked about starting a Negro school here. And they named it the Bray School. Dr. Bray, they said, associates in England, would finance schools for Negro children, especially free black children, slave children, able to go to that school. Started here in Williamsburg in 1760, lasted until about 1774. Well, anyway, Mrs. Vova seemed to have made some deal with Mrs. Wager if she would help to give us slaves there a little of education knowledge about at least a little reading and writing and ciphering, that she would give her some meals from the tavern. So Mrs. Wager and Mrs. Vova was probably the ones that taught me more about the reading and the writing, the ciphering. That's how I learned to read so early. And but Mrs. Vova also, well, she was also very special in my heart because she gave me permission to be ordained. She didn't do that. When I went to her and the Baptist asked me to ask her if I could be ordained, I had gone to her to ask her about that, and she gave me the nod. She said, "Gowan, you have another master in heaven. I might be your mistress here upon this earth, but you have a master called God in heaven. So if God has called you to do this preaching thing, you say, then I must follow God and allow you to do so." And so that's why I was able to be ordained in 1772. And I've always looked at Mrs. Vova as being pretty special because she did not have to have me let me be ordained or even start my church. 1776, I asked her if I could be with my congregation all day on Sunday. And I don't know if you know this, but taverns, the most profitable day for taverns is Sunday. But she would give me all that day off to be with my congregation. So I look at this relationship between Mrs. Vova and myself as a relationship that's blessed of God, not the normal master-slave relationship we have in society, but she seemed to have understood things a little bit better spiritually than most of the others, yes.
Thank you, sir. Continuing on about your education, Terry asks if you and the others ordained have any formal education.
Don't know what you mean by the word formal. I would imagine you were talking about like going to the grammar school at the College of William Mary, or maybe another type of school. But I thought we had all the education we needed to get from those that were allowed to teach us at least simple reading and writing and ciphering. That's about as much as you need to make your way here in this side. For me as a preacher, the reading was very good because I got to learn to read the Bible so well. And I don't know if we ever really had formal schools. Now, something I did not tell you, when I moved into this location here on Nassau Street, I was able to open a denominational school here in the church. So some of my teachers that are part of members of my congregation teach some of my children here, children especially in the congregation, and some of the children in town, they're able to teach them reading, writing, and ciphering, and that was because of the association, the Dover Baptist Association, about 26 Baptist churches that formulated the association. We joined that association and was accepted in 1793. I was the first black church, first black preacher ever to be part of this all-white association, and they gave us some ideas of how to administrate our books and how to teach the reading and the writing and the ciphering. You see, there's no laws here in the year of our Lord 1800 to say that Negroes cannot be taught to read, write, or cipher. Even slaves are allowed to read, write. And now, my fear sometimes, if we don't end the institution of slavery, we might make those laws. But right now, because of not having laws to say it's against the law to teach slaves or Indians or Irish to read, we're able to do so.
Thank you, sir. Karen has asked if Baptists are persecuted in this area.
Not anymore. Not anymore. That's a great question, Karen. Not anymore. Thank God for that. Now, I'm going to tell you, before 1776, and especially when those first Baptists arrived in 1750, there was a lot of persecution. And a Baptist preacher, white Baptist preacher, suffered under the hand of many of the sheriffs and many of the authority figures, because Baptists seem to be one of those called dissenting denominations. That's the one that was not ever to accept any teachings of the established church like the Church of England. But Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, Quakers, Dunkers, Lutherans, Amish, Mennonites, Moravian, they all were called dissenters. But as a dissenter, in order for you to preach, you had to go to the courthouse and get a license. Now, if you didn't obtain the license from the courthouse in that, especially 10 of 13 colonies, you couldn't preach. And if you did so, then, of course, they could arrest you for preaching without the proper license, disturbing the king's peace, and haul you off to jail. Seems like most of the denominations did obtain a license to preach, but Baptists, all of them that I knew in the beginning, refused the license. They said, we will not call to preach by King George III or the governor of Virginia or any of these other colonies. We were called by God. We shouldn't have to answer our calling to man. And for that, Baptists didn't get licenses. And of course, you don't have a license, you couldn't preach. And if you're caught preaching without the proper license, they will arrest you. I tell you, one of the first things I realized when Baptists arrived, if you ever want to hear a Baptist preacher, go to the jailhouses. That's where they all are. You know? They're going to arrest them by the hundreds. And by the way, that's also where your town is not going to have any peace, because if you got 15 Baptists in one jailhouse and you got each of them preach 3 hours each, how much peace is that town going to have? Well, anyway, that's why Baptists were persecuted even more than anybody else.
Reverend, Lois, age 9, has asked, did you wear that when you preached?
Oh, my clothes? Well, yes, Lois. This is normal wear for me. In fact, I wore this when I was in the tavern sometimes, depending on who was arriving and occasion that Mrs. Vova needed me to wear clothes. You see, I was born in the city of Williamsburg. Williamsburg itself would have, at one time, I believe one of the census in the year of our Lord 1775 said it was about 1,800 people living in Williamsburg, but 953 of those people in Williamsburg were slaves. So most slaves would dress just like their owners. Matter of fact, these clothes would be sort of kind of normal clothes you would wear in the city. Now, if you're working on a plantation, because you had city slaves, then you had plantation slaves. Of course, plantation slaves would not be able to wear anything like this. They would have to wear proper clothes for work in the fields. And of course, there were slaves on the high seas. There were just as many slaves on the high seas on merchant ships as it was on plantation. But they had a whole nother life. 3 types of slavery existed. Was field slavery, city slavery, and slavery upon the high seas.
Thank you, sir. Our next question is from James, and he has asked, given that your flock were enslaved, how did you make an income to keep going?
Oh, excellent question, James. In fact, I do like your name. I got a King James Bible, by the way. Well, it seems like here most of my enslaved people, they might not have been able to pay tithes like most free people, even free blacks or free whites and all. Most of them have jobs or occupations or so, and they're able to pay the tithe to their particular church or denomination. Now that we are a free country now, the United States of America, we have freedom of religion. And so you can choose which denomination you want to be now, not just like it was before 1776. There's only one denomination. But anyway, paying tithes is just something normal that all churches will do. Well, many of the enslaved people, as you properly said, did not have ready money. We call it ready money. But what I found out and realized myself, because as I had said, I started out being a slave before I got my free papers in 1793. I was a slave, so I understood this quite well. What many of the slaves here in this society had skills of kind of sort, whether it be carpentry or whether it might be bricklaying or it might be ironworks or seamstress and cooks. Oh my God, we got the best cooks here in Williamsburg. And what I realized, since they did not have really money to pay the tithe, that they still pay their tithe by using their talent. In other words, if there was a need in the church of anybody in need of clothes, we got tailors and seamstress, people know how to sew, can make some clothes, or somebody need something repaired on their property or for themselves. We have carpenters and people with all kinds of skills, so they use their talents to pay their tithe. So you might not have ready money, meaning money put into the plate for offering, but you can pay your tithe by having someone use your talent. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir. Barry has asked if you know a gentleman named Robert Carter III.
Oh, Barry, you just blessed my heart. As a matter of fact, one of the greatest men in the Dover Baptist Association is Mr. Robert Carter III. He was one that voted on me to become a member of that association in 1793. a great member, a very wealthy man, by the way. His father plantation was the plantation I was baptized on there when the Reverend Jeremiah Walker put me down in the water for baptism. His grandfather was named Robert King Carter. And Robert King Carter owned 300,000 acres of land. And grandson, Mr. Robert Carter III, inherited most of that wealth. But about the year of the Lord, I believe 1777, he moved his 17 children, 15 girls, by the way, up to a place called Colonial, the northern neck here of Virginia. And upon his plantation, unknown to him, he said, were these runaway Baptists and Presbyterians on his plantation preaching. Well, most plantation owners, if they find these illegal preachers on their plantation, they run them off. But Mr. Carter, well, he built the Presbyterians a meeting house where they could meet on his property, but he himself became a Baptist, baptized in the Rappahannock River. In fact, they call the place where he was baptized Mr. Robert Carter's Point, where the third where he was baptized in 17. Became one of the greatest Baptists that you would ever known. In fact, he gave his 535 slaves all got freedom. He wrote a deed of gift in 1791, and that gift made them all free at different times, of course, but we call it a deed of gift, and truly to free all of his slaves, all 535. That's why we call Mr. Robert Carter III the greatest emancipated, the first emancipated, greatest emancipated ever that we have ever known, for him to have gotten his slaves set free, because he said it was just, Gowan, it was just the right thing to do.
Thank you, sir, for telling us all about Mr. Carter. We've had a couple of questions about your Bible, sir. Kat has asked if your Bible is an actual book or a collection of pamphlets, and then William, age 11, asked how many homes had Bibles, how many of those were enslaved residents who lived in those homes?
To get a Bible, have a Bible like this is the King James Bible, 1611, first time sent to the colonies here, edition of the King James Bible. Not many people have a solid Bible like this. This is very, very expensive. Have it bound in leather, and of course, the way it's printed all up. Sometimes you get maybe different books of the Bible in pamphlet form. When you said, did you have a lot of pamphlets? Well, of course, you notice my last name is Pamphlet, right? Well, that's because I named myself after, I call one of the greatest pamphlets ever written, and that was Thomas Paine's Common Sense. As a matter of fact, that's how I took that last name, Pamphlet, because I love pamphlets. I think pamphlets got a lot of news, and since I'm going to carry the good news, I think Pamphlet was a good name for me. 1776, I became Gowan Pamphlet. But anyway, as you were saying about this Bible, not many would be in the houses, but sometimes if it is in the house, it's in a special place, or in that house, whether you're living out in a cabin, say out in the wilderness, or whether you're living here in Williamsburg or different other places, if you have something that's cherished, most of the times you put your newborn babies that are just born, you write them in the Bible, and say, for instance, your grandpapa, your grandmama, and your aunt, your uncle, some die, you make sure their names are put in the Bible. It's very, very sacred. So it is a very precious thing to have in the house. So, but as I said, not many people could afford a solid Bible, but they had testaments in pamphlet forms, and they would have that as sort of their own Bible too.
Thank you, sir. Kat asks another question.
Yes.
Did each person, enslaved or free, have to declare their religious identity to a certain church?
Well, it used to be that way for everybody, especially before 1776. And as a matter of fact, as I said, 10 of the 13 colonies, you have to belong to one church. And for the Church of England, one of the main denominations, Anglican Church, headed by King George III in this case, the King or Queen of Great Britain heads all churches of England throughout the British Empire. So everybody had to be part of the Church of England, no matter who you were, bond or free, you had to be along as a part of that state church. At least 7 of the 13 colonies, like in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Delaware, Maryland, eventually New York. You could only be Church of England. Now, if you're in Massachusetts, you could be a Puritan. Massachusetts had the Puritans as your main denomination. And of course, in Connecticut and New Jersey, it'd be Congregationalists. Those were the 3 main legal denominations allowed before 1776, because after 1776, that's why I thank God we won the war. The United States won the war under George Washington. God rest his soul. He just passed last year. I just thought about that. God rest his soul for the General, President of the United States, George Washington. And Mr. Patrick Henry also passed away last year. Those were men that I knew personally. I saw them in my tavern many, many times. But anyway, I don't know why I got kind of almost teared up a little bit on Mr. President General George Washington.
Thank you, sir. We all grieve his passing. This is our second to last question, Reverend. True asks, do you perform dedications and communion?
Very good question. Dedication, communions, yes, I do them all. Communions especially is in remembrance of what Christ did for us on Calvary. I perform in the church along with my ministers, all my ministers, and deacons. I have quite a number of deacons in my church now. We all together, pure communion is served mostly every Sunday, and dedications. Oh yeah, like to dedicate those babies. But the Bible says you got to multiply. And I love to encourage newlyweds, especially part of my counseling to the newlyweds. Don't forget the main importance of this union that you're just about to do is the babies that you're going to have. That's my future, by the way. I said, I have my future congregation, you know. And I do give them some good counseling on to multiply the earth, as the Lord has said.
Sir, speaking of the future, our last question is, as we enter into a new century, what are your hopes for the future of this country? And do you think that you will see freedom for the enslaved members of your congregation?
I have always told people I counsel, and especially those that's been in bondage like myself for a long part of their life, never give hope. Freedom. I always tell them, as I realized for even myself, before I became a free man, I was already freed once I gave my life to the Lord. That was my first freedom. But now, of course, I think everyone needs to be free. The institution of slavery needs to end. I do write many of my politicians and the people there that have in control of making the laws, I do write them letters and try to encourage them to end this institution of slavery. But I tell them never give up hope, because I have seen how far we have come since I was born here in Williamsburg. I've seen what's happened in this nation, what's happened in my life. I'm a miracle. If you look at my life, I would say I'm probably the greatest product of anything, especially when it comes to be calling, as we say, an American. I was an American before America became America. Because in that tavern, I heard many of those great speeches given by some of the very people that become some of our greatest leaders here in this country. And I understood those ideals of liberty, freedom, equality, and justice. Let me end with this. These ideals, and I first read about those ideals in Thomas Paine's Common Sense. So one of the greatest pamphlets, if you have never read the pamphlet, I want you to go and get you a copy of the pamphlet called Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Because in that pamphlet was the first time I saw the first words and the ideals of liberty, freedom, equality, and justice. But I have a warning. I have a warning for you and the people of this country called the United States of America. We shed a lot of blood on those battlefields from 1776 to 1781 to 1783 when we signed the Treaty of Paris. A lot of blood was shed by black, white Indians on those battlefields for these ideals. That means we have to protect those ideals, liberty, freedom, equality, and justice, with everything we have. Because I really do think those ideals are very, as they say about glass, fragile. Meaning, as much as it took for us to secure those ideals of liberty, freedom, equality, and justice, we can lose them overnight with a blink of an eye. We can lose those rights that we did not obtain until after we became a nation with laws, with a constitution, with the Declaration of Independence that said all men are created equal. We would not have able to secure those rights if we not win that war. So my warning to you of the future, especially young people, especially I call you out tomorrow. You have the responsibility to protect these rights. Sentry on duty, bearing arms for the protection of those rights. If we don't protect them, we will lose them. And you never ever want to be in a country that you don't have those rights. God bless you, heaven shine upon you until we meet again.